Hi, my name is Jen Shefflin, and I'm going to explain the evolution of my inquiry question and the development of my instructional plan that correlates with my inquiry question. First, I'm a fifth grade teacher. I teach literacy every day, and I was thinking about what aspects of literacy my students struggle with. And in thinking, I determined that my students struggle with word identification skills, and I started to form my inquiry question based on this. So my inquiry question originally was what instructional approaches can be implemented with fifth grade students to build word identification skills? And in thinking about this question and also communicating with Dr. Madden, I determined that my inquiry question should be a little more specific and examine a specific aspect of word identification skills. So I chose vocabulary. So my new inquiry question was, what vocabulary instruction can be utilized to build upper elementary students' vocabulary? And then I began to research vocabulary instruction for upper elementary students, and I came across many useful articles, but I finally decided to use an article titled Fostering the Development of Vocabulary Knowledge and Reading Comprehension Through Contextually Based Multiple Meaning Vocabulary Instruction. And this article described the impact of a specific form of vocabulary instruction on third grade students of various reading levels and on fifth grade students of various reading levels. And the approach that they used was called contextually based multiple meaning vocabulary instruction, meaning that the vocabulary words will be presented in the context of sentences or a passage, and a student would be exposed to all the meanings of that word. In the study, like I said, third and fifth grade students were involved. It took place in a Midwestern public school. There was a control group and a group that received the instruction. And both control group and the students that were receiving instruction were of mixed levels. And the instruction was in 2-day lessons where 6 target words were presented, and then within these 6 target words, other vocabulary words that were related to the meanings of these words were also discussed. And originally the teacher started by presenting the target word within the context of various sentences that demonstrated every meaning of that word. The third grade students learned vocabulary words that only had 2 meanings, whereas the fifth grade students learned target words that had 3 or more meanings. So the teacher, who was properly trained and had all the materials needed, presented these 6 target words within the context of sentences and began with a discussion about what the words meant. And after discussing what the words' meanings were, they did activities to reinforce the skills that they would need to understand the vocabulary word. The teacher also would point out if there was patterns, if there was prefixes, suffixes when introducing the word. And then after introducing the word, these students did something called word meaning mapping, and this would take place on day 2 of instruction. So they would have to link the multiple meanings of a word through a graphic organizer, and they'd also have to write out the multiple definitions of that word. And then the final reinforcement activity that also took place on day 2, the students had to read a passage with target words embedded in the passage and decide if the target word was used properly in the sentence. So this required the student to, again, know the multiple meanings of the word, but also be able to understand the meanings within the context of text. And students went through multiple lessons over a long period of time, and then they were assessed based on how the instruction affected their vocabulary knowledge. I should mention too, they were assessed before conducting this form of lessons, and then assessed again using the same assessment to determine what knowledge they gained. And the results found that third grade students who were of lower vocabulary knowledge had dramatic increase in their vocabulary knowledge after the vocabulary instruction. But the higher vocabulary, the students with a higher vocabulary knowledge in third grade didn't see as much growth. Across the board, all third grade students involved in receiving the specific vocabulary instruction improved their comprehension. So that was interesting to see as well. With the fifth grade students, the lower level fifth grade students who had lower level vocabulary knowledge increased dramatically, just as the third grade, and the fifth grade, higher level fifth grade students did not show that as much dramatic growth. So it can be concluded that this vocabulary instruction benefited lower level students more than the upper level students. When looking at fifth grade's comprehension, neither the lower level or higher level showed dramatic growth in the comprehension. So when thinking about all this information and coming up with my instructional plan, I chose to focus my instructional plan on fifth grade students. I chose to focus it on the lower level fifth grade students because, as evident in the article, they were able to show more growth. And for my instructional plan, I chose to implement a similar vocabulary instruction, including demonstrating the meaning of the vocabulary words within the context of text and teaching the students multiple meanings of the vocabulary word. And then on the second day of instruction, I plan on having the students work with word mapping as it was explained in the article, and also had students read passage of text and determine if the words were used properly or were not used properly in the context of the sentences. I also plan for students to work in partners when doing the word mapping portion of the lesson to build some collaborative learning. And I also plan for students to again be pre-assessed before the instruction and then receive a post-assessment after the instruction. The instruction would take place over a month's time frame. And as I said, the purpose would be to develop the fifth graders' vocabulary knowledge, and it would be my hope that the students would be exposed to multiple meanings of vocabulary words through the instruction, and they would develop their speaking, reading, and writing vocabulary through instruction. And the materials that would be used would be the list of the target vocabulary words, and they will be determined based on students' prior knowledge and pre-assessments. And then there would be graphic organizers that would be used for the word mapping, and there would also be the passages with the inclusion of the vocabulary words for the it is or it isn't activity, which is when students would determine if the vocabulary was used properly, so it is, or the vocabulary word was used improperly, it isn't, within the context of the passage. And instruction would be 2-day lessons over the course of a month, as I said. And hopefully students' vocabulary would improve. I think that, through this inquiry, I learned a lot about vocabulary instruction and the strength in teaching vocabulary words within the context of text versus presenting them in isolation. I learned about the importance in students being taught multiple meanings of the same word at the same time. Sometimes I found that I would teach just one meaning of the vocabulary word within previous instruction, and then the student would come across that vocabulary word and it would be used in a different way, and the student would be confused because the meaning I taught wouldn't apply. So I think that presenting many meanings of a vocabulary word will help them in understanding vocabulary. I also had, more inquiry questions coming through this experience. I wondered why this instructional format of the multiple meaning context-based vocabulary instruction, why it impacted the lower level students so much more than the higher level students. And I was wondering if it was just due to the fact that within the study, maybe the vocabulary words weren't differentiated enough, and that's why the higher level students didn't develop. So I would be curious in the future if this study was conducted again, if there was a differentiation between the students who were receiving the instruction, meaning that the lower level students would receive certain target words and the same format of instruction, and then the higher level students would receive a different list, a higher level list with the same format, if the higher level students would see more growth. And I think that that would be something interesting to learn more about and maybe even try in my classroom. I also was curious, and still am curious, how to determine what vocabulary words students should know. I know that as a 5th grade teacher, we're provided with lists through programs, but I sometimes wonder how to choose the vocabulary words that I teach, and then again, how to differentiate these vocabulary words among different levels of students. But overall, I learned a lot about teaching vocabulary and improving 5th graders' vocabulary, and I hope to incorporate my new knowledge into my classroom. Thank you.